What is up, everybody? I hope you are having a fantastic evening. I got my brother with me, and we are going to discuss everything 49ers related, draft included. Cannot wait. Let's hit this intro. All right, welcome back to Last Second Sports, where we are giving you our take down to the last second. It's Jesse, and you got your boy Sunil with us. What's up, Sunil? How you doing?
Man, 2 weeks in a row.
I know, dude. What is going on
Dude,
around here? You know
talk
what?
about that regularity with this show, man. We give you the best and the prize, and we're dedicated 2 weeks in a row.
Super dedicated. The next 2 weeks we won't be doing a show because I'll be in Bora Bora. But listen, 2 weeks in a row, you can't make everything perfect. You know what I mean? Gosh, dude. Actually, you know what? I'm going to tell you something, little something personal here. It's, I get it's a 49er show and all that. Nobody's listening anyways, so it's just you and I.
Right.
Today I got new appliances, right?
Ooh,
Dude,
congrats.
let me tell you, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So my oven and my microwave, for those of you that are young, when you're 40, you'll understand the excitement here. My oven and my microwave Bluetooth together. So when I turn on my oven burners, the light from my microwave and the fan from my microwave turn on automatically, Sunil. That is crazy, dude. Technology is wild.
Whoa. And Bluetooth.
Yeah.
That's insane. Yeah, man. I mean, me and my fiance, we've been looking for houses. Obviously, I asked you for advice, and the amount of appliance knowledge you get from looking at houses and stuff that I never even knew existed, like pull-out microwaves. Like, that's a thing. It looks like an oven, but it's really a microwave. Like, didn't know that existed.
Dude, it's adult stuff. The things that get me excited is just like, it's so stupid. If 20-year-old me was listening to 40-year-old me, to be like, dude, what are you talking about right now? Anyways, that's not happening. So let's talk about the 49ers. Sunil, the draft is coming up, end of April. Free agency is basically done. I mean, it doesn't mean they can't sign guys. Maybe they will after the draft to try to fill the holes of whatever is left on this roster. But what do you think their draft strategy should be going into this draft?
Yeah, and I mean, this is always the tough one because we have what it should be and then what it probably will be, right? And I mean, I think it's a no-brainer right now, Jesse. We just saw, right, the dynasty team, the Kansas City Chiefs. The blueprint has been set as far as how to beat them, right? The two teams that have beat them in the Super Bowl, the Tampa Bay Bucks and the Eagles, were both built the same way with really, really, really tough defensive lines and really, really good offensive lines. And so if I'm the 49ers and I know, hey, the teams I need to beat to win a Super Bowl are the Eagles that have a really, really good defensive line and a really, really good offensive line, as well as the Chiefs that have, the best quarterback in the league. I need to build through the trenches. So that is what would be my strategy. Now, what will be the 49ers strategy? Who knows? Because I know you and me disagree on this, but I've been on years about how bad the 49ers are in the first round. I think the first round is all John Lynch's gut, and he just goes with who he's heard is the best players from his friends, and I don't think he listens to the scouts or Shanahan or anybody. I think he just goes with who he thinks is the best pick, which is why there's so many misses in the first round. And then you see later on in the rounds when he's probably listening to his scouts more is where, the 49ers seem to make up the difference of how much they missed out on the first round.
Yeah, the 49ers, to me, best player available is always the way to go. But if there's a question mark, if there's a tiebreaker to be had, let's say, then always go trenches. So, for example, let's say you have a corner and you have a defensive tackle that are rated closely and you're trying to make that final decision, go with the trench guy. That's what I want to see. So best player available. If the corner is by far the best player on your board, I don't care what position it is. Go with that player. But if there is a tiebreaker to be had, you have to give the tiebreaker to the trenches no matter what, because the 49ers need to come out of this draft somehow, some way with multiple players, multiple starters on the defensive line, probably potentially multiple starters, if not this year, into the future on the offensive line. And the only way that you're going to do that is by drafting trenches. Now, that doesn't mean you reach, that doesn't mean you only draft trenches, but there is going to be plenty of guys that should be number one on their board in certain rounds that are trench guys. You know, this is a heavy defensive line draft. So to me, this is this is what we need to be looking at. This is what the 49ers should be looking at. And if there is a tiebreaker to be had, you have to go trenches. Have to.
Yeah, and I mean, also, I mean, I think best player available, like you mentioned, is obviously the right way to go, unless there's such a deep drop off from who's the next guy, right? So, like you mentioned, I think, let's say the top guy is a cornerback, right? Have cornerback, having another starting cornerback under contract for 4 or 5 years, I think is great. Not if the next round you're not going to find a starter on the defensive line, if that makes
Mm.
sense. Because,
Yeah, I
like
know what
you
you're saying.
mentioned, a cornerback isn't going to help them beat these teams that we mentioned. They need so much. They need starters on the defensive line. They're not getting them through the draft. They need them to be cheap. So yeah, I think before I've been like, yo, you can't. The 49ers need to go best player available. They can't draft for need in those top rounds, which I think they usually do. The problem is they've missed so much that now they're kind of in a position where I don't think you could compete unless you get starters on those in the trenches.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's see, then this is the worry. And this gets into the next question, which is, do the 49ers have a drafting problem? I mean, one thing that we can say is that when it comes to drafting in the trenches, especially early on, they have a low hit rate. And I don't think the 49ers, well, I'll let you answer it and then I'll give my opinion. But that is one thing that is true. We do know that in the first round, especially along defensive line, they have really struggled to draft defensive tackle in particular since this regime has taken over. But do you feel like the 49ers overall have a drafting problem? Is it a round one problem? Like how do you see their draft strategy and how things have played out since Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch have been here?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious, right? The fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh rounds, they hit so much more than in their first 3 rounds. And that's consistent, right? Like the amount of players that they draft in the first 3 rounds that don't make it to the second contract versus the amount of people that are below fourth and beyond that make it to second contracts, it's insane. So they absolutely have an issue. Now, with that being said, Jesse, that's what's confusing, and that's why my answer is yes, they do have a problem. And but the confusing part is it's harder to draft in the lower rounds, like to get all pro caliber players out of the lower rounds. That's harder for as consistent as the 49ers are able to do. That shows me that they know how to scout, they know how to prospect, they know how to identify players that'll fit into this system and be able to play at a elite level, because those lower round players aren't just popping out with a bunch of talent and all that kind of stuff like the first 2 rounds. So why are they so bad at the first 2 rounds? To me, it's something is different in those first 2 rounds on how they make decisions than the lower rounds. And I think the lower rounds are this is just, you know, maybe a
Speculation.
little bit of facts, but mostly feelings. I think that the people who are are supposed to be the ones that are scouting and making the decision, their input should be uh, valued the most, are the ones that are making those decisions in the lower rounds. I think in the top 2 rounds, um, their value, their voice isn't as valued, and I think it's a gut feeling through a certain. So we disagree on who that someone that overrides it. I think it's Lynch. I think you think it's Shanahan, but yeah, I think that's what the problem is, and we've seen it, right? The only 2 people that they've drafted in the first round that have made it to a second contract are Nick Bosa and Brandon Ayuk. Nick Bosa was a anybody would have made that pick, right? After Arizona picked Kyler Murray, Nick Bosa was by far the best player in that draft. A dummy could have made that pick. Brandon Ayuk, I think they get credit for, right? As far as trading up to get him and identifying him and picking him. But everybody else,
well, even then, though, didn't Justin Jefferson go after?
Yeah.
So it's like as good as it was, it's like, well,
yeah, it could have been better, but at
Jefferson,
least
yeah.
He made it to a second.
That's
He
true.
made it to he got an All Pro. So like that I think you still say, hey, they hit on that, and they get credit for drafting up, identifying. But 2 out of 7, it's not good. And I'm Ricky Pearsall yet to be seen. That's why I'm not saying 2 out of 8, because you still got to get.
I don't think he'll make it to his second contract, and it has nothing to do with his skill set. And this was the issue that I had with drafting him, anyways. Day 1 of his second contract, so that first season on his second contract, he'll be 29 years old.
Yeah,
that's so old to be starting your second contract.
He needs to be amazing, right? So they're like to want to give him that second contract. But yeah, I mean, so to go back to answering the question, yeah, they absolutely have an issue because their inability to get sticky players in the first and second round, Jesse, is the reason why they're in this issue right now, where they're cash strapped, right? That's the difference between them and the Chiefs and the Eagles. The Chiefs and the Eagles don't miss on their first and second round picks. So when they're letting go of players, it's by choice, not because they have to, right? Because they've replaced them with younger contracts that are playing at a high level because they're hitting so much on their first and second round picks.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Justin Jefferson was a couple picks before IU. So, but the big mistake actually was made by the Eagles in that draft, who went Jalen Reagor, and the very next pick was Justin Jefferson. So
they're pretty terrible at drafting receivers, other than Devontae.
Yeah, for sure. So there you go. But yeah, listen, we went through an exercise last year around this time where we actually went through round by round with the 49ers. And I wish I had that data in front of me, but from what I remember, they were well above average, like rounds 4 through 7 on their hit rate, way above the league average. It was those first 3 rounds where they were either at average or well in the first round for sure, well below average. I think the second round they were below average. Third, they were like right on average. And then 4 through 7, their hit rate was phenomenal compared to the rest of the league. So it's not that they have a draft problem. They have an early draft issue for sure. And regardless of who it is, I mean, we can argue all day, Shanahan, Lynch, it really doesn't matter. There's something different that is happening in those first few rounds, and they need to rectify it, because whatever's happening later in those rounds or the later rounds of the draft is certainly a recipe for success. And even then, I don't think the 49ers have a drafting issue. I think they have a roster building issue as far as a philosophy goes. Somewhere along the lines, they've lost the plot. Early on, it was like trenches, trenches, trenches. And then the last few years, they haven't drafted hardly anything in the trenches on either side, and Pooney was a great hit. But for the most part, they're not drafting trenches. And so now the 49ers are in a position going into this season where all of those years of not drafting trenches are adding up. And we're starting to see like, oh my gosh, the 49ers, when you look at it, 2026, let's just really look at the offensive line and the defensive line. 9 players, 9 starters. Only 2 of them are basically guaranteed to be with the team. One of them is Nick Bosa on the defensive line. we need 3 starters along the defensive line right
Right.
now, let alone next year. Who the hell is going to be here? So those 3 are who knows. And then next year with the offensive line, if Trent Williams retires, Pooney's the only guy. Brendel may not be here. McKivitz may not be here. We don't even know who the left guard is going to be. So really, 2 out of 9 players, that's it. That's guaranteed to be here going into 2026 season. They have to find the other guys. They have to find the other 7 in this draft and next year's draft somehow, some way. And that's because they haven't consistently drafted trenches the way that they should.
See, I would push back on that because I think it goes back to uh, a problem with drafting, especially in those first 2 rounds, because they have Solomon Thomas, Javon Kinlaw, Drake Jackson. Like, these are guys that are, if you're supposed to hit on some of those, right? To miss on all of them, right, is an issue. I think they have an issue with, especially when it comes to defensive line players, identifying the right players in the draft and picking the right players when it comes to the defensive line. That's why the way they've been able to make shift that defensive line, Jesse, is not through organic draft picks that they've developed. They've had a few here and there, but it's been through free agency or getting guys like Charles Omenihu, getting guys like that are like those mid-season kind of for the 6th round pick, 7th round pick that Costa Rica has been able to coach up. That's been how they've been able to develop these defensive lines. I do think they have, at certain positions, they struggle. Defensive line is one of them. They haven't been able to identify and draft the right person. That to me is a problem. I don't think it's that they're not investing enough draft picks, Jesse. I think they're bad at picking guys. I think they're bad at defensive line, potentially offensive line. You know, they obviously they have 2 guys, McKivitz and Pooney, that are guys that they've developed. Maybe you could throw Burford in there if he makes it. But for the most part, they've also makeshifted offensive lines through trades and free agency. But you look at linebacker, you look at running back, you look at wide receiver, you look at corner, like these are guys that safety, like they're able to draft those positions much better. They struggle with drafting guys in the trenches unless they're no-brainers like a Nick Bosa, right? Those are that's the one hit that they've made, but that was a no-brainer. So I do think it's a problem, especially with the trenches. I don't think if there was a lot of success showing that they could pick the right guys in the later rounds as well, they're not getting the right guys. It's other positions that they're hitting on, never the trenches.
I mean, I'd have to go back and look, but I feel like the last 3 drafts, they've taken 3 running backs, and that's probably as many as players as they've taken on the defensive line.
Yeah.
The last 3 drafts, like,
but then
okay.
think about,
so you're missing, and you're not picking them enough. It's okay.
I mean, that's the big thing, right? If you have a better hit rate at other positions, kind of makes sense to pick those positions than the position that you always get wrong. But that's a problem, right? Eventually you have to build through the trenches and get younger. So
for sure. And Winrilla has a couple comments that I starred here because I liked them. He says, what if the best player available is a running back? Then take him. I mean,
Genty might be there at 11.
By the way, the 49ers have 4 picks in the top 100. One of those is going to be a running back.
Yeah.
I feel like I can almost just like lock that in at this point. I feel like that's going to happen. So be prepared. And then he says, how did they give up 3 first-round picks? That was the dumbest pick ever. They should have fired John Lynch after Trey busted. Yeah, I mean, and the problem is only they know like who is really in on Trey. But no matter who they would have taken, they all would have sucked. Mac actually probably wouldn't have sucked in this system. I feel like a lot of people would really think he's the second coming. But now that we've seen him play elsewhere, we know he's not a very good quarterback. Just none of those guys were good. And it was such a weird year, the COVID year, and you couldn't actually watch him at a combine. And there was just so many weird things about that year that just, it was just an off year for quarterbacks, man. It was hyped to be something that it wasn't. Justin Fields isn't any good. I don't know how he's getting yet another chance to start. Lance, Mac Jones, Zach Wilson, like they just weren't franchise caliber quarterbacks, you
I
know?
mean, it
So
kind of goes back to your point about roster building, though. The reason why they did that is they were desperate. They missed on, they made some bad decisions with quarterbacks and picking wrong quarterbacks and missing on quarterbacks. So I mean, I think that because they're pretty good at later round draft picks and because they were able to get some big names through trades and free agency, that it masks some of their foundational skills, and now it's showing that separation between the organizations that have those skills. So I think there's a big drop off from the Chiefs and the Eagles and the Ford. I mean, the Rams, I would put,
the Rams are doing a
probably above
phenomenal
the
job.
49ers when it comes to just fundamentals of building a team. Even though 49ers have had a lot of success, I think that points back to Kyle Shanahan's ability to be a coach, because I don't think the organization, and I would put it on the GM. I'm heavy on John Lynch's issue that he doesn't get enough. I think that he gets shielded because so many people just point to Kyle Shanahan and make him always the issue, like he's making all the decisions and all that. John Lynch isn't as good of a GM as the results of this team has been. Um, because there are really great examples of great GMs in this league that don't have the same issues that the 49ers have, namely the Eagles, the Chiefs. I think Washington's going to be that with Adam Peters.
Mhm.
Obviously, it's just a year. He still has time to do that. I don't know I forgot who the GM is with the Rams, but he's somebody
Les
that
Snead.
should be up there. Yeah. I don't think that John Lynch is in that caliber of GM as those guys. I just think we have a much better coach that can mask some of his deficiencies as a GM.
Yeah, that you may be right about that. What was I gonna say? Oh, yeah, yeah. That going back to that year though, I mean, everything was wrong with it. I mean, when you really just kind of look back at what happened that year, that was such a panic move to draft a quarterback at 3, move up and draft a quarterback because they missed out on Stafford. Then they turned their attention to Watson. All the stuff started coming out about Watson. So of course they steered clear. That was the right move. Then it sounds like they were going after Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
Then that fell through. And so that's when they're like, all right, panic trade, move up to 3. We don't even know who we want. We'll figure it out once we get there. There's a bunch of prospects. One of them's going to be good, and we'll figure out who that's going to be. That was just the wrong move. And then even the day before the draft, there was rumors that the 49ers once again tried to trade that pick for Aaron Rodgers and
Right.
were unsuccessful in doing so. So the whole time, Kyle Shanahan clearly wanted the veteran quarterback. He was unable to get that, and then they had a panic move to take a rookie, and it just the timeline never lined up with the rookie. The rookie with where they were at and their progression as a team, it never lined up. That would be like right now today, bringing in Aaron Rodgers for
Yeah.
this. Let's say the team didn't have a quarterback, and it was like, okay, you have the 3rd overall pick this year. You can either go Shador Sanders or whoever. Let's just say
Yeah.
Shador Sanders, or you can go Aaron Rodgers. They're like, we're going Aaron Rodgers. Well, but Aaron Rodgers only has 1 year left, and this team's not ready to win. Those timelines don't match up. This is when you would take the rookie.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was just bizarre, and it is funny because still to this day, people like myself who are Trey Lance guys get held way more accountable for some reason than the organization that actually did the
Sure.
foolishness.
Yeah.
It just, but when you go back and you just like 1,000-foot view on what happened, crazy, crazy, crazy set of circumstances to even make that come together.
For sure. Especially if the way it planned out, you could have gotten one of those guys that you liked at 11, right?
Yeah,
Or where they were,
yeah,
and still have your first rounds for the next 2 years. And that ultimately became a big deal, obviously depth wise. That got masked because they lucked out and got Purdy in the 7th round. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
it's like, there's a lot of, I think this year has shown, and this offseason is manifesting issues that have always been there, but now all the band-aids that had fixed some of these that had led to success are coming off, and now people are finally seeing them. But I know we've talked about it. Like, we've been talking about how bad they've been in the first round for a couple of years. You and I know have done that on the show, and some of their, you're really big about some of the contracts that they've done and the void years and all that. Like, yeah, I mean, this team has had a lot of success despite it not necessarily being run like a team should to sustain that success.
Yeah, absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely. Somebody asked about the running back prospects. I mean, to me, Ashton Genty and Omarion Hampton, those are 1 and 2. And then after that, it can go a million different ways. I mean, some people like Caleb Johnson, some people like Traven Henderson, some people like Dylan Sampson, Quinshon Judkins. Like there's a bunch of different ways that you can go. So, but I think those top 2, Hampton and Genty are pretty much like your lock 1 and 2. So Daza says, how different is the team now if Kyle had stuck to his guns and gotten Cousins who he originally wanted? It's a very good question, honestly. Because he would probably still be here to this day if we're being honest. He would still be the quarterback right now.
Honest.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so crazy because their quarterback, the whole quarterback thing really does come back to that. Their whole plan was he's going to be a free agent. Kirk Cousins is going to be a free agent after the 2017 season. That's who they're going to go get. Totally in on that. Then all of a sudden, Jimmy Garoppolo becomes available. They make the trade. Even Kyle Shanahan says he was like depressed for a while afterwards, and then he came around. So then they signed Jimmy Garoppolo, who they didn't have to sign if they didn't want to. They easily, if after the 5 games, Kyle Shanahan was like, this is not the guy, but he's got a lot of pop. We can franchise tag him, then we can trade him, and we can still go get Kirk Cousins. But they didn't do that. They stuck with Jimmy Garoppolo, and then you had the option to get Tom Brady after the 2019 Super Bowl. You didn't want to do that because you felt like he was on the decline and Jimmy Garoppolo was on the come up. That cost you potentially a Super Bowl. There's so many misfortunes that the 49ers have had when it comes to specifically the quarterback position. I mean, that's really really important stuff.
The ripple effects, if Kirk Cousins was here in Kyle Shanahan's second year, right?
Yeah.
There would be no discussion about quarterback, like you said. Now they're just building a roster without ever having to worry about who's going to be the quarterback. We haven't had an offseason other than maybe last year where we were like, oh, we know who our quarterback's going to be going in. Even this year, Jesse, it's gotten back to how long is Purdy going to be here, right? Because they haven't signed him long term, all that kind of stuff. So for how in flux this quarterback merry-go-round has been for the 49ers, if Kirk Cousins was here, all of that would have been quiet, and they would have just been focused on picking talent around him, and it would have been there would be way less drama, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Kenny says with Wentz and Pickett in Cleveland, do they take a quarterback? Is Wentz in Cleveland? I heard there was mutual interest. I didn't see that he actually signed, so maybe that happened. If he is there, then I would say they probably go Abdul Carter number 2. So, and then that's scary. I mean, my gosh, him and oof. That's scary stuff. Dave says, Jess is killing it. 100K next for you. I appreciate you. Thank you for the comment. Yeah, 100K is a long ways away. Not even thinking about it. All right. Kyle Juszczyk. Yeah. I have to ask your opinion on this because this was like the big news over the last week was letting go of Kyle Juszczyk, bringing him back. What were your thoughts about this whole Kyle Juszczyk situation?
Man, I mean, how much changes in a week, Jesse? Like last week, our show, we were just like, what was the most surprising thing about this offseason? And I was like, that the 49ers are actually doing this, right? They're
Yeah.
getting younger, they're being smart with their money. They're like identifying that they need to, go in this different direction. And then it's not even a week. The next week, we're like, oh, they re-signed Kyle Juszczyk, a declining player that is older, that once again, hasn't been performing as to the level of expectations on us. Like, man, like I'm completely confused. I have no idea, Jesse, why they made that move. It looked like based off of how much they paid that Luke guy from Jacksonville, they were going to start, maybe moving into a different kind of, two tight end sets and things like that. But now they got Kyle Juszczyk back, and it's like, I don't know what they're going to do now. It's like, it's confusing. I wasn't a big fan of it. I mean, Juice has been a good player for us for a long time. He's not that anymore. And I don't even know how this helps financially, right? I mean, you were mentioning it. How does the dead cap money, like, what happens? Is there any dead cap, or did they actually cut him,
Yeah.
or is it just, I
When
don't know.
you cut a player, and they did actually cut him, when you cut a player and there's dead cap, you can re-sign them, but you will take on the dead cap from cutting them.
So
So
what was the
they
point?
have
How does this?
3.57 million in dead cap. Now, that's not cash that Jed York has to pay, by the way. That's just goes against the salary cap. So they have that dead cap plus, I don't even think his contract is posted yet, plus whatever his contract is this year, that will count towards the salary cap as well. So they may have paid him less cash. Like Jed York might have saved a little bit of cash. We're talking probably less than $1 million. But what they put on the actual books, they definitely paid more than what they were set to pay on the books.
So it's money that they can't use towards a different player, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So it makes no sense. It makes no sense other
I don't.
than, yeah, I don't even know why.
Uh James says the dead cap was going to be dead cap. No, it wasn't. You don't have dead cap unless you don't have that player on the roster. That's dead cap. They were going to have something against the cap for having him on the roster, yes, but then we're going to have dead cap this year if they didn't cut him. That's not the way that it looks. It's not how that
The
works.
only thing
Dead
that
cap
maybe
is when
makes
you don't have a player on the roster, and then that's called dead cap. So, like,
there would be a
factually
cap hit,
speaking,
but it wouldn't be dead
yeah,
cap.
there'd be a cap hit, not dead cap. The dead cap only happens when a player is not on a roster, essentially.
And the only thing that maybe makes sense is it fits into their criteria of let's pay the bill now. So whatever that dead cap hit was going to be moving forward, whatever the new contract is going to be less towards the cap. But ultimately, I think this year it's clear that Jed York is trying to save cash, and I think they want to have the books as clean as possible going into next season.
Yeah. Okay. So this is my question to you. Like, have the 49ers lost the plot? Because last week we sat up here and praised what they were doing. It's like, oh my, they're finally doing it. They're getting rid of these players. They're taking the cap hits this year. Since then, they cut Floyd. We knew that they were going to cut Jerome Hargrove. The whole Shannon Sharp. We get Jerome Hargrove. So we knew that he was going to get cut. We knew that Floyd got cut. Collins got cut. And all three of them were post June 1st designations. So now they've already got 21 million towards next year's cap that said, I'm like, hold on a second. My whole thing was they were taking all the cap hits this year and they were getting younger. So the moment that they did that with Juice and brought him back, completely threw me for a loop. And then with the Floyd thing makes sense if you were bringing in his replacement. So the timing of the Floyd situation was they cut him. It's like, okay, that means that Joey Bosa is going to be here. Obviously, they don't need them both. Well, then Joey Bosa a couple hours later signs with Buffalo. Floyd still gets cut, signs a couple hours later with the Falcons. And then the blocking tight end situation with Luke Farrell makes sense if you're cutting Juice, which they did, but then they brought him back. I feel like the plan that was so crystal clear, and I'm not saying that overall I don't like it. I still like it overall, but it seems like the plot has been lost a little bit with some of these recent things that they've done since we talked last.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's not it's not to the book, I guess we could put it that way. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, we have to see what happens through the draft. Obviously, a really, really great draft can make all of this moot, you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, there are some questionable moves. Obviously, neither of us are cap experts, so maybe there's some kind of explanation that Parag could give us, if we could ever get him on the channel. Parag, if you are, bro, I'm Indian too, bro. Come on the channel. We got some questions for you, my man. So yeah, but from our elementary understanding of the cap, it definitely doesn't make sense to make some of those moves.
Yeah, absolutely. Hold on, broadcast. Oh, what what would happen if this channel existed at the beginning since the Kyle Shanahan era? I think I mean, I don't know, maybe the channel would be bigger, but uh I would have been happy with them getting Kyle Shanahan. I really liked Kyle Shanahan in 2017. I really liked they went after him. That was the right choice. And I think that Kyle's done some great things, but there's obviously some shortcomings, and now we're in year 9 and things really have to come together. We have to see them retool, rebuild, however you want to say it, and they've got to do it on the fly. And so there's a lot of things. This offseason is really, really important, regardless of the good and the bad that have happened before it. Let's remove all of that and look at this offseason as a standalone offseason and break it down. But yeah, I mean, in 2017, you would have heard me say things like, man, this is a great hire. This is who I want. And I would have been very happy with Shanahan. Okay. What do you expect from the Brock Purdy contract situation? We talk about how they've got to move forward, Sunil. This offseason really is important, but a lot of it is surrounding Brock Purdy and what they're going to do. So if you had to take a guess at this, what do you think they're going to do with the Brock Purdy contract situation?
And once again, this goes back to what they should do and what they probably will do. And
Okay.
once again, before the use check move, I might have had more confidence that they potentially would stand pat and really be physically and financially responsible with their Brock Purdy contract. But now I think it just goes back to everything that they do. They extend this process out to be way too long, and they end up caving and giving a contract that basically acquiesces to whatever the player's demands were, right? We've seen this how many times now with when it's like Kittle to Bosa to Debo to Ayuk. Like, this is just another thing. And I think ultimately I don't have the confidence that the 49ers are willing to do what's tough. And that's just hold pat when you have full leverage and stick to your guns till and make sure you quote unquote win the negotiations. I think ultimately they're going to do what they always do, is wait way too long to sign a contract that the player would, if you offered this right now, the player would have signed immediately and you wouldn't be having to go through all of these hurdles.
It's interesting because all this last season, I said whatever contract they sign him to, the assumption was always they're going to sign him to a deal, is going to tell us a lot about what they think of Brock Purdy. So whether that's the length of the contract, the amount of the contract, how it's structured, when the outs are, all of that is going to tell us what they think of Brock Purdy. If they don't sign him to a contract, I think that says less about what they think of Brock Purdy and more about Jed's commitment to this regime. Because to me, if they don't sign Brock Purdy, that means they want all options open to them just in case they move on from Kyle and or John, is the way that I feel about it. I don't think it's a Brock Purdy thing as much as it would be a Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch thing. And unfortunately, Brock Purdy would be caught in the crosshairs in that situation, because if they do go with a new regime, that new regime may not want to be tied to Brock Purdy. And if they do, they can always franchise tag him. They can figure out a long-term extension next year and they can move forward with him. But if they don't, they have the clean break from Brock Purdy if they so desire. So as much as I think if they sign him, which I actually still think they're going to, but if they sign him, whatever those terms look like has to do with what they think of Brock Purdy. But if they don't sign him, I don't think it's a Brock Purdy situation. I genuinely think it's tied to this regime. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I got killed for saying that what Jed York is doing right now is because he's looking for making sure that he has an appealing situation to change this regime, right? Absolutely. I think that if they don't sign Brock Purdy, it's because once again, it's going to be harder to attract the best coach and the best GM if they're tied to a quarterback that they might not be excited about, right? So clearing all this cap money, not committing past certain amount to past next year for money and all that kind of stuff to me is, hey, win with what you have. You built this over the last 9 years. Show me what you can do with this. Otherwise, it's been a decade. I need to move on and give another regime a chance to win a chip. And so, yeah, I completely agree with that. It's just, do I have confidence that Jed York is going to stick to his guns? He hasn't yet. So, it'll be the first time if he if he does this.
I can't wait and I'm going to be gone. So for me, I'm not really going to be able to put together a show or anything during this time, but the owners meetings, they've got to ask some really good questions. And I'm going to talk to Grant. Hopefully he can ask some questions and be consistent in his question asking with Lynch, with Shanahan, and with York. And I want to see if these dudes can all line up and if they're on the same page.
Yeah,
Because if they answer these crucial questions differently, then that will tell you like they really are not on the same page with what's happening here financially, with the quarterback, any of that stuff. So I'm curious to see what their thoughts are because this time last year, when Jed York was asked about Brock Purdy, he couldn't wait to open the pocketbooks. Oh, we found our franchise, and Brock's definitely going to be here long term. And he's not going to ask for anything that other quarterbacks aren't asking for. And we're so prepared to just pay him, and we can't wait to make him the franchise. And, all great franchises have franchise quarterbacks, and we feel like we found just on and on and on. If he's asked that question again this year, he's not going to say negative things, but listen to how he speaks about it. Last year, he couldn't take the smile off his face. He couldn't stop talking about him. He couldn't stop gushing about him. Is he still the proud father that he once was? I am curious to see in these owner meetings.
for sure. Because ultimately, good run organizations get these deals done early because they only get more expensive, right? So we just saw, what the Bengals just did with their wide receiver tandem. Whether you think that move is smart or dumb, like they got it done early. You saw what Cleveland did with Myles Garrett. Both of those contracts make the Cowboys now look at Micah Parsons and are like, he just got more expensive, right? So yeah, I mean, the fact that they're still waiting to me, Jesse, is an indicator that things haven't changed, or it's an indicator, what you're mentioning, that Jed York isn't sold on this regime and he doesn't want to do that. But I would think that then you come out and just say, hey, like, this is what it is. Like, Brock Purdy's playing on the rest of his I don't know if you keep negotiating if you feel that way on Jed York's part.
Yeah, I bet this is going to get really interesting. Kenny said, Jesse and Sunil, do you think Kyle will be here for over 10 years if he doesn't win a Super Bowl by year 10? So that would mean, is he here in 2027? Ooh, I mean, logically speaking about this, depends on how the next two seasons go. If they don't win a Super Bowl, I could
Yeah.
see it. But if if we have to just make a stab at this and how we think the next 2 seasons are going to go and will he be here, I will say he doesn't make it to year 11. What do you think?
I agree with you.
Okay. Wow. That's okay. Holy moly. Oh, oh my gosh. I can't believe it. I thought we were going to have
Yeah,
to
and I
fight
mean,
over a
once
hypothetical
again,
situation.
that's not because I think Kyle Shanahan is a bad I think he gets swooped up. They fire him. I think
Yeah.
it doesn't even last a day, and he's swooped up by another team, and I think he's going to do great with them. But ultimately, you can't give a decade to a coach and not get a chip, and that job still is intact. Like it just doesn't make sense.
Man, we'll see how this whole thing goes. All right. Last topic. This is a decision that's going to have to be made by essentially April 1st. So we've got like 10 days or so, a little over 10 days until this is going to blow over because there's a bonus straight cash, homie, that's owed to Brandon Ayuk on April 1st. So if he's going to be traded, it is going to happen very, very soon. The Patriots have not stopped, it seems like, chasing Brandon Ayuk since last year. They've tried to get every wide receiver under the sun this offseason. They've been unsuccessful in doing so. So it seems as if they've turned their sights back to Brandon Ayuk. What are your thoughts here? Do you believe the rumors that they're still in on Ayuk? Do you think there's a chance he gets traded? What are your thoughts on the Brandon Ayuk situation?
My thoughts are that this hasn't been shut down by the 49ers, that there's some truth to it. Because I think this is an easy, hey, Brandon Ayuk isn't going to be traded. Now, I don't know if there's not been any, maybe there hasn't been any press conferences where this is brought up or whatever. But to me, the fact that there's this much talk and there's not any reports that are coming from some of the 49er kind of quote unquote insiders that kind of the 49ers get their news out with and stuff, that's saying that Brandon Ayuk is off the table. There is no discussions about trading him, all that kind of stuff. So nothing's refuting these. Usually that's what happens when the 49ers they're very big about controlling the narrative. The fact that this narrative's out there, I think there's some smoke there. Whether or not they actually pull the trigger, I don't know. But I think that the asking price is going to be exorbitant. Like they're going to need a lot to trade Brandon Ayuk. But if the Patriots are willing to give it up, I think that maybe they would trade away Brandon Ayuk.
It's just crazy to me that we are here a year later and the possibility still exists that this man might get traded. I never would have ever predicted this the moment that he signed his contract. It's like, no way. If you told me a year ago that Brandon Ayuk is still going to be in trade speculation to the New England Patriots of all teams, I'd be like, yeah, right, man. There's no way. How is that possible? But the way that they've built the contract has made this totally possible. And that's what I find very interesting is it's almost as if they built a trap door into the contract, knowing that they weren't quite sold on Brandon Ayuk and they might want to revisit this again 1 year later, depending on how the season went. Now, unfortunately for them, they got and him that he got injured, which complicates things. But man, this is absolutely crazy. Yeah, I mean, I think the possibility certainly is real. And you're right. The 49ers do a great job of controlling the media. The Dre Greenlaw situation is a perfect example of this, where Dre Greenlaw went to the Denver Broncos, and then a couple days later, fans are upset, and all of a sudden we hear that the 49ers really fought hard, man. They went back and they tried to pry Dre Greenlaw from the Denver Broncos before it became official, and they were so persuasive that he signed with the Broncos anyways. But, that's a narrative that is dropped because the 49ers want that narrative out there. So if they didn't want the narrative out there behind Brandon Ayuk, they would squash that narrative. But they clearly don't mind that it's out there. So we'll see. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire, but that doesn't necessarily means he gets moved. But the possibility is certainly real. Yes.
Yeah, and if he doesn't get moved, that doesn't mean that they weren't thinking about it, right? So they're
Oh, for
gonna
sure.
if it doesn't happen, obviously they're gonna be like, we were never gonna trade Brandon Ayuk. We just signed him last year, gave him a big contract last season. He's part of our future, blah blah blah. But it was just not even 4 months ago that they were like, we don't trade away players like Debo just to trade away a player like Debo, right? So yeah, I mean, once
Nobody makes me bleed my own blood. Nobody.
it's yeah, I mean, to that last person's question where they were talking about does Kyle Shanahan make it to year 10 without a Super Bowl? Personally, I think that after this year, I don't think Lynch and Shanahan are both here. I think one of them is gone, if not both of them are gone after this year. This is a
I've always said that you would know that Kyle's on the hot seat when John Lynch gets fired.
Yeah, but I think they would fire John Lynch and give Kyle Shanahan another year.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
so if they had fired John Lynch this last offseason, then that means Kyle Shanahan's on the hot seat, right?
Yeah.
But because they didn't fire him, I feel like he's not on the hot seat. But if they fired him next offseason, then you know the clock is on. Like they're
Right.
clocking Kyle Shanahan, time to go potentially. And
As
then
it should be. I
yeah,
think that's
yeah,
fair.
yeah, I think so too.
I personally think John Lynch is the bigger problem. Obviously, I
Mm.
think I'm in the minority when that happens
I don't
because
think John Lynch does squat.
yeah. See,
I just
that's what I
genuinely don't
think
think he does anything.
that's the narrative that I think he gets to skate on. But ultimately, you're the GM. You're supposed to. You see teams with strong, good GMs. They have a lot more success. He's the GM. He should be doing the things like the Howies, like the Veaches, are doing, and he's not. So to me, that's go get an upgrade. And I think we had one with Adam Peters, but Jed York didn't make that move like he should have. But I think ultimately Lynch needs to go. And they need to get somebody, preferably from the Eagles. I would say, like, I would get somebody from the Eagles organization that's been learning under Howie Roseman for however many
Yeah.
years. Bring him in, and I think that would be a good trajectory for the 49ers.
You know what's so funny, and the Adam Peters thing is so interesting to me. It's like a case study. Some 49er fans think he's the end all be all, and some just, oh, he didn't do anything, and whatever. I don't know the truth. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But I will say this: the argument that people make against Adam Peters, which is, oh, the 49ers had their best draft the moment he left. What does that say? Okay, well, first of all, last time I checked, drafts aren't done in April, in February, and in March. They're usually a couple years in advance. So every single scouting moment that was done for those players up through February was done with Adam Peters there. So the point is that if you liked last year's draft, there's a good chance that Adam Peters played a huge part in it. Because he was there scouting those players up until the point that he left. You know what I'm saying? So that whole thing of, oh, they had the best draft ever and Adam Peters wasn't here. What do you say to that? I say that he played a hand in it because he was there for most of that process, including the 2 years in advance when the scouting actually started on those players that you drafted anyways. What are we talking about?
And it's an easier draft to have because the first time in 3 years they had a first round pick, right? So
Right.
you can adjust your board differently than if the first pick you have is in the third round, like it was, previous years kind of thing.
Yeah, and by the way, my argument is not that Adam Peters is the end all be all. My argument is simply that argument that they had their best draft the moment he left is the worst non-ball knower argument I have ever heard in my entire life. Brian says, I'm a new member. I appreciate that, Brian. Thank you very much. Spidey G asked the question a couple times. I went ahead and started. It says, Jesse, why did the 49ers have the same success with Jimmy as they did with Brock? Is Brock not really better than Jimmy? Is it Kyle's fault? Did Jimmy have worse weapons but a better O-line? Just curious. I think there's multiple things that can play into that. I mean, everything from the opponents to injuries to the roster construction, plays called. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. And this is why, for me, you have to be able to separate the results of the team from the player that you're evaluating every time through. Because just because a team has success, it doesn't mean the quarterback's good. And just because a team doesn't have success doesn't mean the quarterback's bad. And Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy are great examples of this. We all know that Brock Purdy is better than Jimmy Garoppolo. And why do we know? Has nothing to do with the results, because the results are the same. We know because we have two eyes and we watch the freaking games. That's how we know. So, but it's a great question. Sunil, I appreciate you, brother. 2 weeks in a row, we made it. I'll see you again, hopefully in 3 weeks. Although you might be on the move, so we'll have to talk about that. But much love to everybody in the chat. I really appreciate all of you for contributing. I will be back tomorrow on Bleacher Report, and as always, have a blessed evening. Peace.